Our little show. You know, I'd like to start the show off with some good news because there's been too much bad news recently, and we all know to what I'm referring. Yesterday I got back the results to my annual physical examination from Doc Rubin. We all know Doc Rubin. He's the old country doctor, the old GP who's got his offices out on Broadway right across the street from Fairchild's Funeral Parlor. They call that Synergy. And what he did was, he said to me, Pep, it's so good to see you. You're healthy as a horse. He knows all about this because he started out as a veterinarian, but he figured it was a lot safer, dealing with people. People are much fonder of their animals than they are of other people. You can understand what I'm saying. And he says, Pep, you're healthy as a horse. And I said, yeah. And he says, Pep, if you calm down, I'll give you another 25 years. And I said, Doc Rubin, you know me. You know Preston Pepper. I am not gonna back down. I am not gonna relax. I'm just not gonna calm down. And he said to me, I knew you weren't gonna do that, Pep, and that's why I give you another 30 years. So you're stuck with me for another 30 years, boys and girls. And here we are today. I hope you enjoyed our little cinematographic presentation. We were hoping to do something a little bit more elaborate. But unfortunately, with no electricity, we had to get Frank on that bicycle generator, and we did what we could do. I have a lot of experience. I'm in the movie business. In fact, I put it to good use a couple of days ago. I was in New York having a little dinner with Rupert Murdoch, one of my best friends. And we were eating at the Abattoir. What a beautiful place. The Abattoir is the only 6-star restaurant in New York City. And it's run by my good friend, Dominique Simone. Dominique Simone is one of the kindest, the most wonderful, the most gracious people in the restaurant business. He knows what he's doing. His family has been in the restaurant business for 150 years, starting out humbly in Bordeaux, France. Originally, they were in the slave trade. When that business was shut down, they used the skills they had accumulated in the slave trade to get into the restaurant business. In fact, Dominique often says, it's amazing, you can do things to a waiter or a busboy they never let you do to a slave. Anyway, he's sitting there, and we're having a little bit of dinner, and then trouble breaks out. Off in the corner, Francis Coppola and is getting a little bit juiced on some Guinea Red, and I'm not too happy about that because he's disturbing everybody. We've got a very select clientele at the restaurant. This wine, in fact, was distastefully decanted by Dominique, and he said, oh, Pep, he's making a fool of himself, but everybody. I said, I'll take care of this. I'm going to take care of this. And I said, don't worry. I said, mon ami, je vais faire quelque chose tout de suite. So I get up there and I walk on over and I walk on over there and I get in front of him. He's also, with his friend Marty Scorsese. I know both of these guys from my time out in Hollywood. There's nothing to them. And I say, look, fellas, you're a little juiced up, but I'm going to tell you something. Just because you were weaned on spaghetti doesn't exactly make either of you Federico Fellini. I knew Federico Fellini, boys, and I studied cinema with him, and neither of you were Federico Fellini. I came to Federico Fellini as a young man, as a student, and I left as the master. He said, Pep, you're the master. When I close my eyes and I look at you, I see somebody only a little bit larger than Orson Welles, and I said, Federico, it's beautiful to hear that. Well, anyway, I said, neither of you are Federico Fellini, and I just turned. You could have heard a pin drop in that restaurant. Could have heard a pin drop in the restaurant. They both got up and just left without paying the check. And all the people there, David Rockefeller and some of the boys from Goldman Sachs, they were cheering, oh, well done, Pep, well done, Pep. And, it's the kind of thing I've really felt empowered to do since Bubbles McAdoo bought me the title, Laird of Dundee. I have a sense of noblesse obligé now that I didn't have before. I might have just knocked the two of them out and thrown them out the door. But we do not do things like that in a six-star restaurant. Well, anyway, I come back to the table and, Rupert Murdoch says to me, it was quite a show you just put on, Pep. And he said, what do you think was the matter with them? And I said, they were drunk, And Rupert looks at me and says, drunk? I smell liberals. I smell liberals, and I'm going to tell you something. Neither of those guys is ever going to get a good review in one of my papers for one of the lousy movies. And I said, well, that's the price you pay for public intoxication. It's a terrible thing. Anyway, I am so happy to be here with all of my friends. I just got a little, carried away with that anecdote. I know you want to hear about my adventures, which are numerous and interesting. And for the mundane lives you lead, it'll cheer you up a little bit. We have been roughing it too up at Eagle's Claw. That's Bubbles McAdoo's magnificent mansion on the Hudson River. And even though we have a nuclear reactor, we've had to channel a lot of the juice up to Sing Sing. We don't want them to be without electricity, if you know what I mean. Anyway, I'm so glad to be here because this is where it all started. And I'm going to tell you a story. The people who listen to Pep Talk, the people who come here every Tuesday night to listen to my message of truth and hope, when I tell everybody, America, turn your radio dial all the way to the right. It's me, Preston Pepper. The show is Pep Talk, and we are going to tell it like it is. Richard Quinn and I have dedicated our lives to combating liberalism in all of its insidious forms. I have quite a tale to tell, in fact. I was a big shot. I was the biggest thing in right-wing radio. Glenn Beck himself used to refer to me, to Preston Pepper, as the inspiration. But I got too big for my own custom-made Savile Row britches. One night at a party, I met a woman. I met a woman who I thought was going to be the love of my life. I had failed in love 7 times. But when I met Ann Coulter, the queen of the right, I thought, my God, that's the woman for me. And boy, was I wrong. Because Ann Coulter, I want to tell you something, many of the good people out there for years have followed her right-wing message, believing it to be sincere. It's nothing of the sort. Ann Coulter is not a real partisan of the right. What she is a Mata Hari. Ann Coulter is a Mata Hari, a double agent working for the liberals to bring America, to bring the Republican Party, and to bring God down. And it doesn't get much worse than that. We've got some damning circumstantial evidence that could bear this out. I was talking to Karl Rove. He's a real pussycat. He has to get tough during a campaign. He does what it takes to win. But Karl Rove is a pussycat. He said, when I told him the story, he said, Pep, she could swing for that. If this was the Wild West, she could swing for that. They used to swing you for a whole lot less. Who says things get better? I don't. After that, I fell. I fell into the bottomless pit of alcoholism. I was living in a hovel over the garage in Mrs. Blair's estate out in the horse country, out in the North Shore of Long Island. I was drunk all the time. I had no friends, I had no cell phone, I seldom bathed, and I liked it that way. The only friend I really had was the kid who delivered my booze every week from the local liquor store, and I had a bottle under my bed, Canadian Club, I'd drink it down, and that's what I wanted. I wanted to fade away after 40 years. In the culture wars, I said, enough for all Pep. But one person didn't want old Pep to fade away. Bubbles McAdoo. Yes, Bubbles McAdoo, the jolly socialite from the Hudson River Valley. In her younger days, in fact, she was often referred to as the Doris Duke of Dutchess County, and she's known all around these parts for her numerous eccentric philanthropies. When Bubbles heard what Ann Coulter had done to old Pep, she sent her chauffeur Othello to fetch me. It was one rainy night, and I was laying around my little room waiting for the delivery from the liquor store, and there was a knock on the door. I hurried to the door expecting to get what I needed. Instead, I stared into the eyes of a total stranger. He said, Miss, Bubbles wants you to come with me to Eagle's Claw, her magnificent mansion up the river. My God, I said, I didn't like it one bit, and I hauled back and I took a swing at him, and I woke up rubbing my jaw in the shower. Little did I know that, amongst other things, Othello had been the welterweight boxing champion of the world. And then the wildlife got to him, and he ended up spending up all his money, and he ended sleeping on Skid Row completely destitute. Bubbles, however, always a big fight fan. You know, she used to work as a cornerman for Roberto Duran. She gave him a job, cleaned him up, and now he's as loyal to Bubbles McAdoo as a dog from the pound. For the next 6 days, Othello was my constant companion as we sparred, as we fought, as we took sauna baths and did exercise in a program of sobering me up that I can only describe in one little word: torture. At the end of 6 days, shaved, bathed, and well-dressed, Othello led me into the great woman's presence. You're looking good, Pep. You're looking really good. But we don't have time to talk about that now. In half an hour, you've got a job interview with Richard Quinn at Rockland World Radio. Oh, God. Quinn was to the point. He didn't waste any words. He said, Pepper, we're a small company, but we want to grow. We're tired of the toilet bowl. We want to go to the Super Bowl, but we don't have a quarterback. And Miss McAdoo has said it just might be you. As he spoke, I searched for a way out. I may have been clean-shaven and well-dressed, but inside of my guts was a swirling miasma of self-loathing. At that moment, something occurred that I will remember for the rest of my life. I felt Bubbles' hand squeezing mine. Don't you worry, Richard, she said. Just dust off the space in your trophy cabinet. You've got your quarterback. And that's how I came to be. Here at Rockland World Radio, shoulder to shoulder with Mr. Richard Quinn, as we fight doggedly to save America from the liberal conspiracy. You know, Bubbles, in fact, told me when she was a young girl, in her staunch Republican family, and what a family she has. Her father, Ebenezer McAdoo, is the richest man in the world. I mean, who wouldn't love somebody like that? I do. Oh, yes, some peculiarities. I mean, you go to lunch there and you'll probably have to eat what he eats, and the only thing he eats are caviar sandwiches on Wonder Bread with mayonnaise. But when you got that kind of money, you got to forgive a whole lot of transgression. Anyway, what happened was, Bubbles says to me when I was a girl, most of my family were big Rush Limbaugh fans. And you can understand why. Back in those days, the fat man put on a hell of a show. But not Bubbles McAdoo. She was always a fan of my old show, the Preston Pepper Show, where I went wild. I went absolutely wild. I was completely out of control back then, and she loved it. And I'm going to tell you something. When a woman like Bubbles McAdoo gets an idea in her head that she wants something, be it a puppy, or a kitten, or a racehorse, or a man, there is nothing on this green earth, that's going to keep her from getting it. You know, here I am. I'm not getting any younger, I'll tell you that. I'm not getting any younger. None of us are. But that's not to worry about, not as long as we've got Andy out at Fairchild's. I'm going to show you what it's like to be Preston Pepper right now. Here is where I do my best work behind the microphone. It's almost part of me. Good evening, America, and all ships at sea. It's time for you to turn your radio dial all the way to the right. It's time for Pep Talk with me, Preston Pepper. Here's where you come. Here's where the libertarians love. Here's where you get your message of truth and hope. I got a bunch of letters here tonight, and I'd like to share some of the correspondence I have with you. This letter is a very interesting letter, and it says, Dear Mr. Pepper, to my way of thinking, the policies of the current administration to correct the problems with our economy are akin to treating insomnia with a pot full of black coffee. And it's signed Java. Well, you know, I agree completely with what Java says, and I encourage all the people out there, the thousands of people who are waiting by their radios for the bank to foreclose on their mortgages, to write to me, and I promise them that the letters that they send to Old Pep are going to receive exactly the same treatment as that little note that Java scribbled for us. You know, one of the reasons I invited all you people here, if you didn't know by now, we got an election coming up, and I'm going to say something tonight that is probably going to come as a shock. It is something that's going to come as a shock. You probably never thought you would hear old Pep say this, but I'm going to say it now. In this election, I will not be voting Republican. How can that be? How can I, Preston Pepper, the original small R Republican, the libertarian voice of truth and hope, say such a thing? Well, it's a long story, and I'm going to tell it to you now. When the primary process started, I was, as many others, not pleased with the selection we had. I mean, we had some people. Oh my God, Rick Perry. Rick Perry thought that the Daily Llama was a newspaper. Can you believe that? And then there was somebody, Michelle Bachmann thought Sherlock Holmes was a real estate company. When you're dealing with those kind of people, you realize immediately that your party has problems. And one night on Pep Talk, Rich was here, I declared that the remaining 4 candidates in our primary process were aptly named the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Of those 4, I decided to go with the one man I truly believed had the ability to lead America forward on its righteous path, and that was my good friend Newt Gingrich. Newt had everything it took. He had years of congressional experience. He knew how to crack the whip and break that logjam apart in Congress. He also was a historian. He knew things. But it wasn't to be. I spent a lot of time on the campaign trail trying to get Newt the nomination. So did Bubbles. But one night I got a phone call. Yeah? Yeah. Oh, my God. It was Carl Rove. Carl and I used to be very, very close. Not so much anymore, but we'll get to that later. Carl says to me, Pep, the polls say that Newt can't win. I said, the polls have been wrong before. I seem to remember a certain Harry Truman. He says, forget it, Pep. Don't get that out of here. Get that out of your head. He said, these polls don't lie. Now, there's a very small margin for error. They're really sophisticated now. Nobody likes Newton. I want you to be the man who's going to have to go to Mr. Gingrich and tell him that he's got to drop out of the race. And I said, I could not do that. He says, Pep, I know you love the Republican Party. And I said, damn straight I love the Republican Party. I love the Republican Party more than my own kin. But there's limits to everything. Newt Gingrich is a good friend of mine. And I said, Carl, you know, Newt Gingrich is an intellectual. If you were to look into Newt's head, you know what you'd see? He said, no, I don't know, Pep. What would I say? I said, you would see a swirling vortex of intellectual activity closely resembling what was left of a trailer park in a Texas Twister. He said, yeah, well, that's probably why he's not an adequate candidate. Look at the people we're playing to. Look at the people we're playing to. Pep, he said, you know the old story about the guy who goes to the Texas legislature and he sees a bunch of idiots, which there are probably plenty of down there, and he says, oh my God, I haven't seen such stupid people in my life. One of the old boys walks up to him and he says, you know, you think we're dumb? You should see the people who elect us. Pep, that's the way you gotta think on this. Newt's just too ahead of his time. In fact, 200 years from now, Newt Gingrich is still gonna be ahead of his time. He's just too sophisticated for our voter base. I said, my God, I'm gonna have to think about this, Carl. I was some depressed. You know, I want to tell you something, by the way, boys and girls, about Newt Gingrich before I tell you what happened. A lot of people said that Newt was cold and callous and uncaring. There is nothing further from the truth than that insinuation. Newt Gingrich is one of the most sensitive people I know, and I'm going to tell you a story related to me by my good friend Clarence Thomas that's going to bear me out. Apparently, when Newt was a little boy, when Newt Gingrich was a little boy, his parents heard him crying. He was crying, and he was crying, and he was crying. Oh my God, they thought, when they walked upstairs fearing the worst in there, they found their little son sitting on the floor with a book in his lap. And they said, Newt, why are you crying? He said, oh, Mama, this book, it's so sad. He said, what book is that? Said, Uncle Tom's Cabin. He said, Uncle Tom's Cabin? It's so sad? Why is it so sad, dude? He says, don't you understand? Simon Legree is dead. That's the kind of man that Newt Gingrich is. A wonderful person. And now I was stuck with a gigantic dilemma. And you know, the people who watch Pep Talk, the people who are my regular audience, and hopefully you will all become regulars, they know that when old Pep is having problems, what does he do? Old Pep gets on his old cell phone and he calls his dad, Red Pepper. And I dial it up and I say, hello? And he said, oh, it's you. Yeah, it's me. He said, what do you want? And I said, I want to. He said, don't try to fool me, Pep. I got to tell you this. You only call when you want something, you know? You only call when you want something. I'm not saying this to make you feel bad, but it's true. You only call me when you want something, and that's the way it is. Maybe if you'd had a different mother, it would be a little bit different, and I knew he was referring to his second wife, Antoinette. She comes comes from Belgium, but he's always saying she comes from Paris. It's ridiculous. But anyway, he says to me, he said, what's the problem then? You know, I say, look, Red, they want me to stab my best friend in the back. He said, you got friends? I said, yes, I do have friends, Pop, and they don't like Newt. And he said, oh. I said, what do they want you to do? They want me to bring the message to Newt that he steps out of the campaign. He said, well, son, that's a tough one. He said, you know, you really only have two choices here. You, son, you can wear the world. You can wear the world on your shoulders, or you can hold it in the palms of your hand. You got to make the decision. On your shoulders, and it's a heavy weight, boy, or in the palm of your hands. What are you going to do? But I'll add further. I don't like that Romney guy at all. I said, why not, Pop? He said, would you vote for a guy who wouldn't drink Coca-Cola? I wouldn't vote for a guy who drinks Coca-Cola. And you know what? I'm a lifetime Pepsi drinker. And that's what my dad said to me. And, well, that's what happened in the campaign. We continued the fight for a while. Bubbles, in fact, said, if Newt wants, I'll buy him the election. I will buy him the election because Bubbles McAdoo is the kind of person who never abandons a friend when he's in trouble. The first thing Bubbles McAdoo does when a friend's in trouble is she reaches into her pocket, pulls out her checkbook, and says, how many zeros? But Newt Gingrich is a man of incredible integrity. And he refused. He said, I don't want somebody to buy the election for me. We do not buy elections in the United States of America. Maybe the liberals do. I don't. And so Mitt Romney became the candidate. There was nothing we could do to stop him. And I found myself going to all kinds of meetings while we had to address various problems in the campaign. You know, American politics are rather interesting, as I think you saw in our film presentation. I said one night that probably the only thing that's true in an American political campaign are the bad things one side's saying about the other. Those are the only things that are true. The Democrats are worse, but there are plenty of Republicans, you know, who can play that kind of a game. And people have asked me, Pep, what can we do about it? And I said, nothing. And they said, why, Pep? I said, listen. Speaking the truth in American politics is akin to drinking hemlock. The first person to speak the truth loses. I mean, nobody wants to hear the truth. Who wants to hear the truth? People are always saying, I want to hear the truth. Nobody's ready for the truth. You want to hear the economy's going to get worse and worse? They're going to repossess your house. You'll never afford to put your kid in college? Forget it. And yet everybody goes around saying, I want the truth. But they don't want the truth. They don't want her truth or his truth or your truth. No, they want their truth. That's the truth they want. And that's the truth they demand, and they're never going to get. So I started to think, what could we do? What could we do to make it a little better? And it occurred to me, look, if the first person, it's said to be axiomatic, if the first person who speaks the truth loses an election, stay with me, boys and girls, if the first person to speak the truth loses the election, and you lose an election by getting the fewest votes, it occurred to me that perhaps if we inverted the process and made it so that the person who got the fewest votes lost, then people would consequently speak the truth, because by speaking the truth, they would get the fewest votes and win the election. I thought it was a pretty good idea, you know. I thought it was a very good idea, which had a lot of promise. And you know what? I called up Brad, and I said, I got a brilliant idea. He said, what's your brilliant idea? And I said, look, it's a system like this. Nobody in America can dare speak the truth, because if you speak the truth, you lose the election. So let's turn it around that you'll get the fewest votes, and then you'll speak the truth to get the fewest votes and win the election. I mean, can you imagine what it would be like? People would be making speeches and they would say, I cheated my way through college and I'm going to do the same thing in government. I hate football. I can't stand kissing babies. I love sushi, and I'll tell you something, I think stock car racing is a form of mental illness. You know, I think this would really do something to get the American political process functioning on a truthful level. You know, my father said to me, he said, nobody votes anymore anyway, who cares? That's the kind of life I've got up, that's the kind of relationship I have to put up with my own father. It's not fair, but he's my dad. You know, I was brought up on traditional television. Traditional television, that's an interesting thing, you know. I was walking through the streets of this little town with my good friend Dave, who unfortunately is not with us today, not here with us today, and we ran into a woman who was complaining about the difficulties that her son was having with the Spanish language. And I said, you know, I'm no stranger to the tongue of Cervantes, having spent extensive time in Latin America working for Ollie North out of the basement office at the White House. It's a long story. And I said, you know, I could help the boy out, perhaps. And she said, would you? And I said, you know, it's a possibility. Well, I got involved with the kid, and it was pretty tough because the kid wasn't interested in studying. And I realized as I was working along that these kids are trapped in an unbreakable chain of electronic addiction. An unbreakable chain of electronic addiction. What are they going to do? But reading further, I discovered something that was completely unthought of before, and that was the role of television. You probably remember in the old days, everybody said that television was killing the United States. The liberals were everywhere going, ban television, ban television. Television promotes violence and other negative things. It turns out not so. In fact, according to a survey done at MIT, and that's still a pretty good school, it's not Pepperdine by any stretch of the imagination, and of course many liberals teach there, but they still do a fair job. It was determined that traditional television was far more beneficial than anything that could be cranked out on the internet. And that's what I'm doing now, is I'm spending a lot of time down in Washington lobbying to return traditional television to the United States. Shows like Gunsmoke and Bonanza that will impart values and good manners in our youth. And I'm saying this sincerely from my heart. And you know why, boys and girls? Because if we lose the children, we have no future. This is the greatest country in the world. Do you know that? It's the greatest country in the world. And I want to say something. We all know from listening to the inspirational messages of Reverend Bean on the 8th day, God made America. On the 7th day he rested. It's spoken of in the Bible. But on Monday morning, God was back at work making America. First he made the mountains. Then he made the prairies. Next step, the oceans. They were white with foam. And then he really got down to it. He started to make the shopping malls and the highways and the railways, the ballparks. Was perfect, and he called it so. This is America. I want to tell you all about it, but we have a lot of problems right now. The biggest problem we have is that the economy has gone nowhere with this administration. I'm going to tell you something. If Romney wins, it'll be just as bad. This is a bad down cycle, and there's just no way out. Do you realize while I'm speaking, boys and girls, that 47,000 families are going to lose their homes to foreclosure? Every hour, 47,000 families lose their homes to foreclosure. It's a terrible thing. It's an absolutely terrible thing, and that's why I want to get out of it. And the way I think I'm going to get out of it is I'm going back to Scotland. You know, Bubbles McAdoo has done a lot of great things for me, and one of the things she did, and a great show of her gratitude, was to buy me this title. It's a Scottish title, and I'm the Laird of Dundeel. Why did she do this? Well, Bubbles was very grateful when Karl Rove and I fixed the election and got her elected Mother of the Year. And to pay me back, she went looking for something special. She was thinking of buying me an NFL franchise to run, a baseball team or something, and then a good friend of ours, Major Mike Longley, who is the cricket editor for the Telegraph, he's a great British conservative thinker and writer, said, you know what, Bubs? If Pep were born in Britain, had he have been born in Britain, undoubtedly Her Majesty would have summoned him to Windsor, said, on your knees, tapped him on the shoulders with a ceremonial sword and said, rise, Sir Preston. He deserves a title. Well, you know, they looked around for a while, and there were slim pickings that season. The only thing they could find for me initially was King of Bulgaria, and I wasn't too excited about being the King of Bulgaria. And then one night, Major Mike calls up, and he says to me, I got it. There is a title available in Scotland, the Laird of Dundeel. It comes with extensive land holdings, a castle, and a distillery. Well, we flew out there and we had to go to a Klan meeting. I'd been to many Klan meetings in the United States, but none of them were like this one. First of all, the color scheme's completely different. You just can't take your clothing after this meeting and throw it in a washing machine with a little bit of bleach. And everybody was there. There was the Laird of done well, the Laird of done poorly, the Laird of done whatever. All of them were there. It was a real whodunit. And we started to speak about it, and they said, look, you know, we're in bad shape financially. You know, it's not very good. We can make a very attractive offer. And it occurred to us at that moment that Scotland the brave was Scotland the broke. Well, there sat Bubbles McAdoo. Sweet Bubbles McAdoo with her little tam o'shanter on her head, little tweed jacket, her kilt designating the McAdoo colors. And she said, I'll remember these words till the day Andy lowers me down. She said, worthy lords of Scotland, fear no more. And she reached and pulled out her magic checkbook, and with a single flash of her dexterous wrist, she made Scotland solvent again. And they were throwing their bonnets in the air, and they were pulling out their claymore swords, and they were drinking whiskey, and they were saying, long live Bubbles McAdoo! Long live Preston Pepper! Long live Bubbles McAdoo, the Queen of Scotland! Then we had to get down to business, and we found out what was the trouble. They had been the victims of 50 years of labor governments, but we're doing something to fix that now. And for that reason, I'm going to be spending a lot more time outside the United States. It's not going to be the easy type of a job I thought it was going to be. I'm not going to be able to be an absentee laird, but I don't care. So, I'm so glad all of you came today in spite of the horrific conditions outside. But I want to say something. I got a very good friend, Rabbi Sheldon Feldman. And Rabbi Sheldon Feldman often serves as my spiritual advisor. And one day he said to me, Pep, you know, without a sense of humor, the Jewish people could never, ever have survived Poland. I said, really, Rabbi? He said, really, Pep. They would have never survived Poland. And let me go further, Pep. We're all Jews. And the whole world is Poland. And that's why, to sum up and end tonight's little story, anytime I see somebody who's doing poorly, I always remember to laugh. Good evening, good night. God bless you. This has been Pep Talks. You know, I'd like to dedicate this show to somebody who really played a very, very important part of my life. Yesterday, while we were trying to rehearse this show, and it's been a really difficult time for us. We didn't have electricity, we didn't have heat, there was a shortage of gas for the cars. I was sitting on the couch thinking, could anything get worse? And I get a phone call. And it's my Aunt Polly, and she said, sit down. And that's always a bad start to a story. So I sat down, and she said, your uncle passed away in his sleep. Now, my uncle was the closest person to me in the whole world, and I loved him profoundly. He was an amazing man. He was a philosopher. He was a scientist. And I guess in his own strange way, he was a humanitarian, too. He was a one-of-a-kind type of person, and he probably just got sick of life. You couldn't speak to him too much anymore and find anything he liked about this world we live in. And maybe when it gets to that point, it's time to say goodbye. But I'm going to miss him every day of my life. And I just want to dedicate this show, which didn't come off completely as I had intended, to Dr. Bernard Greenberg, my mother's brother. God bless all of you. I'm supposed to bow, you know. It's when you get to my age, you know. See, I've got these things here. People say, do they hold up your pants? And I say, they don't hold up my pants, but they hold me up. They hold me up, you know. I'm sorry if it wasn't exactly what you were hoping for, but that's the way it is on Pep Talk.